flag
856. The number of migrants who died attempting to cross the southwest border during the past fiscal year. Again, the highest number on record. 98. 98. The number of aliens on the terrorist watch list encountered on our southwest border during fiscal year 2022. Yet another record set by the Biden administration. Remember when Mr. Mayorkas testified in front of this committee last Congress, and we asked him about the number on that terrorist watch list? I remember asking Mr. Mayorkas, at the time it was only 40-something. We asked him about that number. He said, what's the status of those individuals? And his response, I think, was astonishing to every member of the committee, both Republican and Democrat, when he said he didn't know. He didn't know if they were detained, he didn't know. This year, 38, the number of aliens on that terrorist screening database beforehand. Make no mistake, the Biden administration is carrying out its plan. We all heard Secretary Mayorkas sat in front of this committee and said, we are executing our plan on the border. And we all heard President Biden say, we're trying to make it easier for people to get here. Well, they're certainly succeeding in that. And the worst part is that none of this had to happen. Under President Trump, the border was secure. Under President Biden, there is no border. And Americans are paying the price. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Nadler, once he completes his phone call, for his opening statement.
For yielding. I wish this committee was starting off on a different note. Unfortunately, this hearing is more of the same haphazard, chaotic style we have come to expect of this new Republican majority. We saw them take 15 tries to pick a speaker. We saw them fumble on the opening play by needing to reschedule their first meeting. And now this. I suspect this hearing is also an attempt to distract from the fact that Republicans have failed to pass any meaningful legislation in their first month in the majority. Yes, significant numbers of individuals are arriving at our southern border. We all agree that our immigration system is broken, but let's fix the problems where they are, and not where Fox News talking heads imagine them to be. Republicans have proposed building a wall, shutting down the asylum system, and defunding the Department of Homeland Security. Those are not serious proposals. I yield back.
Those who reside in New York who say there is no problem on the border and that the border, to say that the border is open is untrue. We will hear contrary testimony today. It is open, the border is dangerous, drugs pour across, international terrorists, criminal gang members, people from all over the world, indeed over 150 nations.
Over 10 hours to our community to slaughter Mexicans and immigrants, and he used much of the hateful, racist, bigoted, xenophobic language this domestic terrorist did, as many politicians in Washington, D.C. use, as many politicians in Texas use, and unfortunately, as the President of the United States at the time used. He was inspired by that hateful rhetoric, and he used it to fuel his hatred and massacre 23 people in a Walmart in our community. So our words have power. I want to remind our committee of that. Our words have consequences. Judge, thank you for being here. It is a privilege to have you here.
Illicit fentanyl is primarily manufactured in Mexico by the drug cartels and smuggled through our southern border. And it is true that most seizures happen at border checkpoints. I believe 60% of all fentanyl seized last year was in San Diego and Imperial Valley. However, due to the lethality of this drug, any amount smuggled in a backpack or a fanny pack or even in somebody's pocket can be enough to kill thousands of people. So as you can see, it's not just a border checkpoint issue.
There is no open border in El Paso. Immigrants seeking asylum largely present themselves to Border Patrol for processing. El Paso is required to abide by the same immigration laws that other border communities must follow. There is no invasion of migrants in our community, nor are there hordes of undocumented immigrants committing crimes against citizens or causing havoc in our community. Claiming this continues a false racist narrative against these individuals or perpetuates violence that the El Paso community is all too familiar with. When El Paso County was faced with the increasing number of asylum seekers, we established a Migrant Support Service Center to assist migrants to connect with their relatives and sponsors and guide them with a same-day self-paid travel arrangement process. Approximately 35 to 45% of these migrants fall in this category. The benefit of this process is that migrants are moved quickly and safely out of our community at their own expense.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dunn, I know the list of names of people who, in many cases, thought they were taking one drug and died of fentanyl is long. One of the names that you probably have on your list is Matt Capolato in Riverside County, and his daughter, who thought she was taking a Xanax and died. She actually only took half of it as part of her study routine and died of fentanyl overdose. That has led to a murder charge in Riverside County, and our district attorney is prosecuting that. How it will end, we'll see, but it certainly is an example of the kind of response that I hope both the federal government and the state and local will start looking, that these people who traffic in that leading.
We now have in this country 2 million individuals who have gone through the entire process and have been adjudicated for removal. In other words, they came to this country, they applied for asylum, they weren't entitled to asylum, they came here for economic reasons, so they went through, they had due process, they have been adjudicated, they have been ordered removed, and the President of the United States has instructed ICE not to seek those individuals and remove them from the country. From immigrants to this country, we welcome people who want to go through the process the right way, who want legal immigration. But when they know that they're coming to this country and there is no consequence to come to this country illegally, and even when they lose in court and they are ordered removed, the United States won't remove them under this administration, and there is this hope for an amnesty program to go through Congress or informally, as President Obama did, and this president will probably do the same thing, issue an executive order with the stroke of a pen to give people amnesty. What is the impact on people being attracted to this country for all the wrong reasons?
Why are they coming to the United States, the people that you've met in your city?
Well, they're extremely passionate. I wish most of our citizens had the passion and the desire to be in our country like they do. I've heard a lot of different stories. One of them is the fact that they stand up for their rights in their country, and then they're persecuted because of that. They're asked not to do those kinds of things, like they get targeted. I get a lot of them telling me that they're still, their parents will call and say, they go to my house every single day and find out where I'm at. And so they're very passionate about coming here, extremely passionate about working. They all say the same thing, that they're very willing and able to work here in the United States.
Now, while Republicans resort to political stunts at the border and theatrical hearings like this one, Democrats stand ready to fix a broken immigration system. We have a responsibility to act, and we stand ready to work with serious Republicans to pass meaningful solutions. Judge Samaniego, what can you tell me that we should be looking for on our visit tomorrow?
I believe the unity of what happens when a community decides to work together. We're called El Paso del Norte, was our first name, and so we've been doing this for centuries. People pass through our community. We know how to do this in a humanitarian way. We are very, very organized. We have a strategy that I think that people should look at. that, you know, especially this idea of getting communities to send buses to us so that we can have sponsors and migrants that go to their community. So our strategy works. It only doesn't work when we're not funded properly. At any point, we're able to handle large numbers, but then we don't get the proper funding. And when we talk about, like Secretary Mayorkas, so when he came down, he immediately was able to help us with FEMA funding, allowed us to move the processes. And when you push them back into Juarez, all you're doing is creating more anxiety, you're creating more desperation, you're creating more issues, not only for us, but for a community that works, you know, on an economic level. There's no border that works in such an economic level. And to push them back, I think is extremely reckless of our neighbors.
Well, let me stop you there and ask you this last question. According to, is it your experience that an increase in migrants is tied to an increase in fentanyl?
We haven't seen that because, first of all, they come with very little things. I mean, they get a backpack, they get, you know, they're carrying things that are very easy, they're vetted very properly. Not only are they vetted with Border Patrol, we vet them as well. We vet them at the shelters, so we're constantly looking for that. We're taking care of the nation. We're not gonna allow someone to bring drugs in and unwittingly. I mean, we're gonna do everything possible to be part of that process.
Gentlemen,
There's so much more to talk about. I'm sorry I'm out of time. Thank you for being here, Sheriff Daniels.
gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Ranking Member Nadler for welcoming me back to the committee. Many Republicans in Congress seem intent on demonizing migrant families and asylum seekers, portraying them as fentanyl traffickers and violent criminals. In the real world, asylum seekers are vulnerable individuals and families fleeing political persecution and torture. What is the real-life impact that such anti-migrant rhetoric and misinformation have on these communities?
I feel extremely confident that the majority of them have no interest in drugs or doing anything like that other than to work and to participate and be part of the dream that they're looking for. And they were asking for, give us brooms, give us bags. We want to help us. We do not want to be perceived as lingering or burdening your community or any part of the country. And a lot of them, like I said, they're coming out of desperation of how they're treated in their countries, how they're persecuted, and they're looking for a better life.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Judge.
Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Yield to Mr. Roy. I thank the gentleman from Florida. And in your experience talking to other family members and talking to law enforcement personnel, is it your observation and belief that the overwhelming flood at our borders, distracting Border Patrol from being able to carry out their duty to stop the flow between the ports of entry or do inspections at the ports of entry, is resulting in more fentanyl pouring into our communities that is then resulting in the death of Americans and, in fact, the death of migrants in the process?
Many migrants who enter the United States via the El Paso port of entry, and you work very hard to ensure that they're treated with dignity here in the United States. Can you describe what your sense is of why these migrants are entering the U.S., and are they in fact seeking asylum?
We get to see them at shelters, we get to see them at the point of entry, and they're wanting to come here to work, and they're wanting to do something for our country. And I have to stress that we are very, we're very lucky, the things that they want to do and the things they want to maintain and the values that they have for the United States. It's just remarkable that under all the circumstances that they go through, they come to our country with tremendous amount of passion to be part of our value system.
Don't send us more money, they said. They'll only use it to process illegals faster into this country. And I think that the testimony has been bringing that out very clearly today. And as the Democrats' witness testified, illegal aliens are now being rapidly and efficiently trafficked by our government to every community in our nation. What the Democrats have never explained is how our schools are made better by packing classrooms with non-English speaking students, how our hospitals are made more accessible by flooding emergency rooms with illegals demanding care, how our social safety net is strengthened by adding millions of impoverished and dependent individuals to systems that are already strained to the breaking point, how our neighborhoods are made safer by introducing violent cartels into our communities and making it impossible to deport criminal illegal aliens, how our nation's made safer as known terrorists are encountered entering our country in record numbers, how our children are made more secure with fentanyl pouring across our border, or how working families are helped by flooding the labor market with cheap illegal labor. This is the nightmare that the Democrats have unleashed upon our country. New York City taxpayers are paying for luxury accommodations to house this flood of illegal aliens there. In Tulare County, California, a cartel just viciously executed 6 innocent victims. I believe this country is going to soon awaken to a coordinated terrorist attack by elements that have entered through our porous border or with violent cartel wars erupting on our own streets.
You made a comment that they don't stay in our border communities. There is one instance they do stay in our border communities. That's when they die. Over the last 2 years, we have over 1,000 migrants touch U.S. soil coming across our border illegally that have died. That should look at our immigration laws. And I agree with you, Congressman. We have the laws to address it. Legal. And I'll say that. They can come to any port. I can promise you, my 2 international ports in my county, they don't come there. The only time we saw asylum claims on our 2 port of entries was when the cartels were having an internal rift and shot over 40 people. We watched it happen from our international line in my county. We had cartel members claim incredible fear that were allowed in our country, that just executed somebody and then come in and claim credible fear because the other side was trying to kill them. So we have a problem on our border. We truly do, but we need you all's help. You all's help to do it, to fix it. Thank you.
My time's expired. The gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell.
And so recently, there have been a number of tweets that my colleagues have posted. One of them from Mr. Gooden. It says, enough fentanyl to kill 140 million Americans was seized at the southern border in June. In honor of Overdose Awareness Week, I'm calling on Joe Biden to close his open border. 96% of the fentanyl seized in the last fiscal year was seized at ports of entry. And 86% of the convictions around fentanyl coming across our border were convictions of U.S. persons. 86%. We should celebrate law enforcement. We should not deride them and use them to make points that actually don't even land, because the fentanyl crisis is not happening where you all are claiming it's happening. So I will take this opportunity, and I'll thank Sheriff Daniels and the men and women he works with, and I'll thank CBP for the hard work they do. And I invite my colleagues to join us, not in chaos, but in change. One person recently said, with respect to Mr. Roy's bill and proposal, are we stupid? Come on. This country was based on good minds. Look at Albert Einstein. We gave him a piece of paper to come in. We are letting the Albert Einstein of this modern time slip away. It wasn't a Democrat who said that. It was Mr. Roy's Republican colleague. Listen to your own colleagues who know better on this issue, because it could use a lot more change and solutions and a lot less chaos. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized. Mr. Bishop.
Mr. Judge Samaniego.
Yes, sir.
Did you hear about the conflict between the Mexican army and the Sinaloa cartel in the city of Culiacan in early this month?
I did.
As described in The Guardian, it said that they captured Ovidio Guzman, who's son of El Chapo, prompting a wave of retaliatory attacks from cartel gunmen. After a night of violence, gunmen exchanged fire with security forces, blocking roads with burning vehicles and shooting at Army helicopters and police airplanes, bringing reinforcements to the city. According to one resident, heavy fighting raged for hours after Guzman, a key figure in the Sinaloa cartel since the arrest of his father, was arrested in the city early on Thursday. It goes on to say that residents were locked into their homes. All major roads into the city were blocked with burning vehicles, and gunmen attacked a military air base. It goes on. You would agree that the cartels are dangerous organizations, aren't they?
They are.
And they've come to have extraordinary capacity to operate in Mexico to the point that they can take on the Mexican army. Isn't that true?
I'm not sure if that's a true statement, but
Well, in this case, they actually had a running battle with the Mexican army where helicopter gunships were deployed to fire and they were firing at them. There was an open warfare in the city. You do understand that, right, sir?
I do understand that.
Do you not see it as possible that in a future with an uncontrolled border, a border we can't control, that those same conditions could exist on the streets of American cities?
I believe that's not the case because I think we're mixing two things. We're mixing one, and that's unrest. We have unrest ourselves here in the United States, just like in Mexico, and we're mixing two things.
Are the cartels strengthened by the fees they receive for trafficking humans across the border?
Well, you know, I think there's a lot of assumptions.
Is that a hard question to answer, yes or no?
Well, give me the question straight so I can understand what you
My
said.
understanding is that billions in income come to the cartels, and according to the Border Patrol officers I've met, they say nobody comes across the Rio Grande, nobody comes across the border without paying a fee of thousands. And many of these people don't have thousands, so they enter a life of indentured servitude until they pay it off. Their family might be tortured to pay for it. And the cartels earn billions from it. Is that not true?
It's true, but it's true on the Trump era as well.
Okay.
It's not, it has nothing to do
I don't
with
even think it's necessarily should be a battle between Republicans and Democrats about who gets kudos for stopping the flood across the border. But isn't it true that the policy is strengthening the cartels, these dangerous cartels that can operate in the open and conduct open warfare with the Mexican army?
Well, I think you're talking about the root cause, and that's a broken system. The best thing that we can. You know, you're very.
I'm out of time. I'd let you go on. I question your conclusion about what's humane and what's not, and with that, I yield back.
Well, thank you, sir.
Lawfully defied a bipartisan congressional subpoena. Now, Mr. Dunn, thank you for coming here today. Sorry for your loss, and thank you for sharing your story and your efforts on working on the fentanyl issue. Judge Salmon, where you go. I have some questions for you about fentanyl. I agree with my Republican and Democratic colleagues that we need to tackle this issue. It's your experience, isn't it, that the overwhelming majority of fentanyl seizures occur at ports of entry and not from migrants bringing them across the borders. Is that right?
That's correct. That's what we understand. That's what we know. We work so close with law enforcement, Border Patrol, ICE, and we do not get that suggestion that it's the migrants. And we talk directly to them. It's not the migrants that have that issue. It's at the port of entry by Americans, by the way, that are crossing into the United States more so than any other form that comes through our borders.
So Sheriff Danos, thank you for your public service.
Thank you, Congressman.
Do you know which American president said, for decades, the United States has not been in complete control of its borders?
No.
That president was George W. Bush in 2006. Are you familiar with Operation Intercept at all?
I'm not.
Okay. That was an operation put in by an American president that basically shut down the southern border for about 3 weeks. And then it was lifted because it was not sustainable. That American president was Richard Nixon. This hearing is titled Biden's Border Crisis. That is completely wrong. It is not Biden's border crisis. This has been a crisis for over half a century. We worked with Democrats on a comprehensive immigration bill that will, in fact, solve this problem. And with that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
Judge Samaniego, you testified that there's no invasion. There were 162,000 encounters in the El Paso sector alone in the first quarter of this fiscal year. Does that sound correct? According to Border Patrol numbers. 55,000 in December alone. Is that correct? We had the Democrat mayor of El Paso who has been busing people to New York City. Truth?
Nope.
The Democrat mayor of El Paso has not been putting people on buses, sending them to New York City.
Not without notification at the other end.
Okay,
in
but
jail.
they're putting them on buses and sending them to New York City. And New York City today is asking the federal government for money to process individuals that they're dealing with overflowing in New York City. Now, you testified earlier that you weren't getting help from the state of Texas. Now, the city of El Paso declared emergency, but has the county declared emergency?
No.
No, the county has not declared emergency.
No, we did not.
The earlier testimony that you had before, you testified that this effort to want to secure the border is racist. So here's a question for you.
Now, I understand that the issues that we are talking about today require my Republican colleagues to tell a lot of statements that aren't true, to use nativist rhetoric, words like invasion and flooding that have actually been used throughout the history of this country to demonize immigrants to this country, different waves of immigrants that have come into this country. But that is not the way that we are going to solve this problem.
I recognize the gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Sparts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Judge Samaniego, do you believe in the rule of law?
Pardon me?
Do you believe in the rule of law?
Absolutely.
So let me ask you a question. You were talking about asylum seekers. How many of them are actually legitimate asylum seekers, cases percentage-wise, based on the current law?
I think that's an impossible question because they have the right to say that they have credible fear.
If there are a lot of illegitimate cases, do you think it hurts legitimate asylum seekers that actually can be killed by their government?
Well, absolutely. I mean, they're seeking to get away from their difficult situation, but I cannot tell you that's up to the court.
Very desperate people, don't get me wrong. Life is tough in a lot of countries.
I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, Mr. Dunn, I also want to convey my condolences at your loss of your son, Noah. I'm a father of 4, and every day I pray for my children. I'm also Little League.
On a legal basis because they're passionate to come to America?
Well, no, I said they were here for different reasons. They just happen to be passionate as an additional component. I mean, they come because they're fearing what's happening in their community. I've talked to, like I said earlier, when they tell you that every day their mom or their dad calls them and says they come here looking for you every morning and they want to know where you're at, that's why they're moving in this direction.
Thank you. I'm really glad this issue in regards to Governor Abbott moving people to various cities around the country has come up. Have you been critical of Governor Abbott for what he's done?
Absolutely, absolutely, because when you send someone that's not organized and they don't know who's on that bus, and some of them are not sponsored, that's a huge burden on that community.
Have you been critical of the Biden administration when they've flown people all over the country in the dark of night?
I don't know of that taking place. I apologize.
So you have not seen, for example, I have an article here entitled "Biden Administration Quietly Flies Illegal Immigrants to New York in Middle of Night," and we just heard from a fellow member on this panel saying they're doing it in Philadelphia also. Do you think that's right for the Biden administration to do that?
Well, I think it's an indication of that they have to decompress because when we get flights that are going out, it's to decompress the system there with the Border Patrol and has nothing to do with our community.
So did you give the benefit of the doubt to Governor Abbott and say, well, maybe they're decompressing these people on their trips to these cities?
Well,
I mean, isn't it the same thing, Judge Samaniego?
No, it isn't, because it's not coordinated. We've never gotten a call from the governor to tell us, hey, what do you need? How can we help? How can we do things?
No,
and we just get buses.
I really appreciate that. Biden administration quietly flies illegal immigrants to New York in the middle of the night. That's what they're doing. We'll be happy to share this article with you so you can see what's happening there. Thank you for your answer. Sheriff Daniels, I was in your county in June of 2020. What's changed since June of 2020?
Well, we went from, just to put it in perspective, around 5% of my jail population was border-related, up to almost 45% now, 45%. We've seen the pursuit. Last year, we put 180 people in jail for pursuits that were deadly pursuits. When I say deadly, driving at 100 miles an hour plus, endangering communities. Some resulted in deaths. Some we interdicted before they killed somebody. We see the flow of public safety challenges in our community based on this border every day. So it's changed drastically as a result of this border.
Because what I heard from you sheriffs is that there was good coordination all the way from the local level, all the way up to the federal government, June of 2020, and that there was some control being, the border was becoming more secure. Is that generally an accurate statement?
Yes, Congressman. In fact, Border Patrol, when I pull up to the scene to help my deputies, the troopers, officers, or agents, they always make a point to come over and say, Sheriff, thank you for what you do. Thanks for being a voice for us.
We heard earlier that, I can't remember who it was that said that the increased fentanyl is not tied to illegal border crossings. Do you agree with that statement?
No.
And why not?
The criminal cartels are exploiting our border, whether they're trafficking children, adults, males, females, whether they're human smuggling for profit, or they're doing illicit drugs. Either way, the criminal cartels are exploiting a border, and I keep hearing the word, different words about how it's controlled. It's not effectively managed right now, and until it is, the cartels are they're the winners of this.
Those of you on the other side of the aisle, you can continue to wear blinders, or you can do photo op trips like the president did down to El Paso, where they clean up that region before he comes in. You can do that. But the American people are seeing very clearly what's going on. And now that we're in the majority, we're going to try to identify this as much as possible, because you're hearing the truth here from people like the sheriff, from the fentanyl families. And I hope you're meeting with those fentanyl families, because it's directly tied to the border. I want to just close with this. I hope as we go through this process, we also get more information out in regards to the NGOs, the International Organization for Migration, which has weaponized immigration into this country all the way from Panama up to the southern border. I hope we dig in deep to those NGOs that are complicit in the greatest human trafficking operation perhaps in the history of the world. I yield back.